In Chapter 3, we focused on how you promote your services. Advertising is public, visible, and often the first place complaints begin. Now we move to something just as sensitive: how you get paid. Because in 2025, compensation transparency is not just a best practice, it is a regulatory expectation. And as we have seen throughout this course, when the rules become clearer, enforcement becomes easier. Module 4.1 centers on R4 28701, which addresses compensation sharing disclosure. This rule reinforces something foundational in Arizona real estate. Consumers have a right to understand who is being paid in their transaction. Let's break this down in a way that connects to real life. Disclosure of all brokers receiving compensation. Arizona has long required that compensation flow through the broker. Salespersons cannot be paid directly by clients, but the modernization sharpened expectations around disclosure of brokers receiving compensation in a transaction. The key idea is transparency. If compensation is being paid, shared, split, or referred between brokers, that arrangement must be disclosed appropriately. Imagine this scenario. You represent a buyer. You refer that buyer to an out-of-state agent for a relocation purchase and receive a referral fee. That is permissible, if properly structured through brokers and disclosed appropriately. Now consider a more common situation. You represent a buyer locally. The listing broker is offering cooperative compensation. Your broker will receive a portion of that compensation. Your team structure includes internal splits. Under clarified expectations, the consumer must understand who represents them, who is receiving compensation, the nature of that compensation arrangement. The rule is not about limiting compensation. It is about clarity. Consumers should not be surprised by payment flow. Now let's apply this practically. If your buyer believes you are being paid solely by the seller's broker, but in reality you are receiving an additional marketing fee or referral bonus from another source, non-disclosure creates risk. Transparency protects trust, and lack of transparency invites scrutiny. Timing requirements. Disclosure is not just about content, it is about timing. A disclosure provided after closing is not a disclosure, it is damage control. The spirit of R4 28701 is that compensation arrangements must be disclosed early enough for the consumer to make informed decisions. Consider this example. You agree to represent a buyer. Midway through the transaction, you negotiate an additional incentive from the listing broker. You do not inform your client until after escrow closes. Even if the arrangement is legal, the timing of the disclosure matters. Consumers are entitled to understand potential influences on representation before decisions are finalized. Timing ensures informed consent. This connects back to Chapter 1's legal foundation. ARS, Paragraph 32-2153, authorizes discipline for dishonest dealings or failure to exercise reasonable care. Late disclosure may be viewed as inadequate disclosure. Modernization reinforces that clarity. Transparency requirements. Let's zoom out. Why is compensation transparency emphasized more now? Because consumer awareness is higher than ever. In today's environment, buyers and sellers question: who pays whom? How much is paid? Does compensation influence representation? The rule does not require agents to negotiate differently. It requires agents to communicate clearly. Here is a memorable way to think about it. If compensation flows, disclosure follows. Now let's examine a scenario that often causes confusion. An agent receives a referral from a mortgage company in exchange for a future referral promise. There is no direct payment in this transaction, but there is an understanding of reciprocal business. Even if lawful under federal and state guidelines, such arrangements must be evaluated carefully and disclosed appropriately if they create a compensation-related benefit. Transparency prevents misunderstandings. Opacity invites complaints. How this connects to broker supervision. Remember Chapter 3. Broker supervision applies to advertising. It also applies to compensation. Designated brokers must ensure that compensation arrangements are compliant and properly disclosed. If a salesperson independently negotiates a side payment or referral arrangement without broker knowledge, that creates both compensation and supervision exposure. Article 7, compensation, overlaps with Article 11, supervision. Everything in this rule structure connects. A real-world discipline scenario. Imagine this chain of events. A buyer files a complaint claiming they were not informed that their agent received a referral bonus from a preferred lender. The department investigates. Was the compensation through the broker? Was it disclosed? When was it disclosed? Was the disclosure clear? If the disclosure was vague, late, or absent, discipline may follow. And because R428-701 clarifies expectations, the evaluation becomes straightforward. Was the compensation arrangement transparent? If not, enforcement is easier. A practical compensation mindset. Before entering any compensation sharing arrangement, ask yourself, does my client understand who is being paid? Is this routed properly through the broker? Has disclosure occurred early enough? Would I feel comfortable explaining this under oath? If you hesitate on the last question, reassess. Transparency is not weakness, it is protection. How this connects to the next section. In Module 4.2, we will examine buyer-side versus seller-side compensation clarifications and how representation roles affect disclosure attachments. Because compensation is never isolated. It is tied to agency, loyalty, and fiduciary duties. Understanding disclosure mechanics is the first step. Understanding fiduciary alignment is the next.